expert networks fill the void for anything senior, specialized, or niche for perspectives. When considering how to answer the screening question, it's important to give substance, of course, specifics, so that you're signaling to the client in a short period of time that you have the right perspective and that you're willing to discuss it. But of course, that needs to be balanced with the fact that they're not being compensated in most cases for the screener. And so they shouldn't provide insights. They shouldn't empower the client yet with consulting. They should wait for the interview for that. So it's really just them putting their best foot forward, like a cover letter on a resume in 1 to 2 sentences, perhaps, trying to be more objective, numbers, percentages, dollar amounts, to signal something more than just, yes, I'm interested, yes, I'm familiar.
Try to be as specific as possible, because a profile that is not specific does not really say something. The more specific you can be, the more helpful it is for the client. But also to only mention the information that you're allowed to share, that you can share, and that you really have. It does not add value to the consultation if you have heard of a competitor, but you cannot really tell something about them.
My advice would be to provide some type of good information about what you know in the sector, usually something that helps to contact some example companies, competitors that you may be able to share within that sector that you would be happy to talk, because mostly our clients are looking to get specific information for some companies, or for some certain specific areas within the sector. If you can actually flag that you have some specific information about some companies, some certain products, and if the associate would be then able to put that information in profile, that actually really shows the client that that expert has some knowledge in those areas. And then the client would also be interested to hear more about what they have to say.
Screeners are very painful, but very important. There's a natural response from experts to not overshare because they feel that they're being taken advantage of, which I fully respect. The problem is that clients are screening for articulation and behavioral as well. And so if they see short, terse answers or a lack of cooperation in the early stages, they may assume that they won't have a productive conversation on the interview.
The screener questions are ideally comprising of just gauging the fact how much do you know and not what do you know. So you have to find the sweet spot between not giving away the answer, but giving them enough that they know that, okay, this guy speaks the language I am, and that's it.
Vast majority of all responses from an expert to an expert network request come in the first few days. Even if it's a multi-week project, there's a natural process of the volume spiking up front and then beginning to teeter off throughout the field work. Therefore, responding fast when the invitation comes in is helpful because the client might be making decisions in real time, viewing the responses as they're coming in.
My name is Michael Morthos. I founded GoLift 2.5 years ago as a regional expert network focused on Germany, Austria, Switzerland. We typically receive from the client a very detailed information memorandum about the project. So they will typically send us a DIN A4 page containing information about the project. So a short description, potential companies that experts have worked at, the roles that they are looking for. So, for example, C-level executives, sales managers, business development managers, and from there we can start sourcing. But for us, it's also important to get an own understanding of what the client is looking for. So probably in some cases, the client's description does not really perfectly match what they're looking for. So we're trying to get an own understanding, researching the industry, speaking with the client, so that we are sure that we have understood the project to 100%.
So when you get a project as someone working in expert network, you usually get it either from a consulting company or a private equity company or hedge fund. Consulting companies are quite widespread, and when we say in the sort of brief that it's a major consulting company, we probably mean that it's a major one. So it's either Big Four or one of the larger ones. So that's why when you get a project, you are aiming to see within 1 hour if there are any relevant people you're able to get. So that's why you get, as an expert, you get a phone call and, you're asked the questions on the phone, because the phone is always quicker versus if you were to sort of tell the consultants on the phone that, oh, well, I'll respond to the questions that you sent on the email in a day or two. It could be just the case that in a day or two, the priorities of a project will shift and we will be unable to offer you the payment and the consultation. So that's how it sort of works, or looks like from inside.
It's good to think of expert networks' place in the market as largely around senior, specialized, or niche perspectives. A client will come to an expert network, in most cases, hopefully early stage, meaning they're still putting together their own project criteria internally, especially if it's on behalf of a sponsor that isn't their own organization. So they'll come with some basic information at first of who they want to speak with, how they want to determine the relevance of that perspective, how they want to engage with them, the level of involvement, the methodology. Is it just a live conversation, a survey, project collaboration, etc.? And then other sorts of context around the project and the deliverable. Clients are generally looking for 2 to 20 interviews, roughly, as a range. Of course, less than 2 is an anecdote, so it's not enough for what they need. If they're moving very quickly, they're only going to be able to accomplish a few conversations. But if it's qualitative, it's a live discussion, it's rarely going to be more than a few dozen, because in that case, they might use a different methodology like an online survey to reach a broader audience. The logistics will be simpler, and it's just a different format.
There is a reason why an expert network has reached out to you specifically as an expert. You fit some kind of criteria that they researched about you, and just make sure that when you're answering the questions that you feel confident enough to answer them, that you can provide enough information, you feel like you can speak to the topic for about an hour. A lot of people think of expert networks as solely offering calls and consultations, but they actually offer a lot of surveys, and surveys are a great way to make money, and they're also highly revenue generating for the expert networks, more so than the calls themselves. Expert networks are not only a great way to make money from calls and consultations, but they're also a great way to make money from surveys. Surveys are actually more revenue generating than the calls themselves. So highly recommend participating in those surveys.
So the word expert can scare a lot of people because they think they need decades of experience. But depending on a project, it could be just a consultant trying to understand an industry they've never heard about. Because you have to understand that consultants that do projects in those companies are not necessarily experts on several subjects, and they get those projects. You might think that, I'm not qualified enough. But the thing is, for a point of perspective of someone who is just trying to understand the industry generally and not maybe all the specific numbers of it, you could be very much considered an expert. So if you are approached, it's likely that, your experience, as evidence on your LinkedIn usually, is probably enough for the client's needs. And if it's not, the client, there's no harm on getting on a call with the client and see what kind of questions are they going to ask. In general, if you're able to respond to the screening questions, that's why they exist, you are probably not a bad candidate for a specific consultation. If you know your major competition, if you know sort of what the market looks like, overall, no one is really requiring you to memorize or prepare specific figures for that consultation. So you don't have to be an expert in that sense. You just need to be someone who has more exposure to a specific industry compared to the consultant who is doing that research.
I was seeing a lot of experts who were exaggerating their experience or their knowledge on some topic. And obviously, once you try to screen them, and if the expert is good at exaggerating what he has done, we would then present them to the client. But I have seen some cases where experts would have the call, and then once they were asked specific questions by the client, they would fail. And this would be a really bad reputation for the expert. And as expert networks, to protect our reputation, we try not to work with those type of people, and we try to always flag them so that they wouldn't be booked for another call. So I would say, first of all, honesty is really important.
A few sentences is ideal. Too many sentences, a paragraph or more, looks overeager and just cluttered.
There might be positive influence or negative influence of the screening call, where you can show that maybe you have only spent 3 years in a sector, but you're pretty knowledgeable about all the companies there. And then on the other hand, you have been active for 20 years in a sector, but you have no idea about the competition. Then certainly you will rank lower in our suggestion. Try to avoid being too broad on your profile, so no one will believe that you can cover everything. And it's also not we can't make clients happy by providing experts that are not really focused in detail on their sector and on their field.
Expert network consultants always tell people that you should not really prepare, because mostly the things that you will be able to discuss is not something that you have to actually research, but something that you just know by the virtue of being in the industry.
So if it's going to be an in-depth conversation, a standard phone call, then yes, usually 2 to 20 people they want to speak with. They're often, again, senior, specialized, or niche perspectives, somebody who has a specific understanding that's going to help the client make an informed decision or solve a key problem. And very importantly, I want to underline, they're looking for a relevant perspective measured by recency and direct access to the topic area. What do I mean? They generally don't want academics. They don't want generalist consultants. They don't want people who have been far away from the topic at hand for too long. So in-industry professionals often have the most relevant perspective for the topic. There's also a bias towards large, well-known organizations. A lot of it has to do with credibility and trust. If somebody's having to make a quick decision on who has the right perspective, expert network calls are expensive, they have limited time on their project, knowing that somebody worked for a big Fortune 500 logo is going to make them feel better about the person's perspective in lieu of other relevant information to help make that informed decision.